get started. Good morning, dearest friends, holy brothers and sisters. Welcome. Today, we are studying the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. Presently, Masechet Shabbat, the 17th chapter, Kuf Chaf Hey Amud Aleph, turning to Kuf Chaf Hey Amud Days 125. Today is the 12th of Tammuz, July 11th. And before we start, I should point out, today is a special day on the Chabad Hasidic calendar. Yeah, you've heard that once or twice before. Today is the 12th of Tammuz. It's actually a relatively significant day in that it's the day that the previous Rebbe, the father-in-law of the Rebbe who's known as the Rebbe, was imprisoned by the Soviets for counter-revolutionary activities such as coordinating yeshivas or chadarim, really, underground Torah education, attempting to keep mikvahs open, which was very, very, it was a very big problem. The tragedy of the story is that as much as the communist regime as a whole was not in favor of the Torah study, it was really the Jewish section, the Yavseksia, which I'm mispronouncing, that were the ones that pursued the Jewish division, or the Jewish section, the Yavseksia, as us Americans call it. The great tragedy of all is that all those people, well, there's two tragedies. All those people that pursued and viciously sought to shut down and root out any of the tradition of Judaism. Tragedy A is most of them were born into devout religious homes. Some of them were even Hasidic people. So you had people oppressing the previous Rebbe's efforts, whose parents or grandparents had actually been Hasidim of the Tzemach Tzedek or the Rebbe Maharash or other Hasidic moves. So that's tragedy A. But there's a greater tragedy, which is that all of those Jews who were so willing to destroy everyone on behalf of their newfound faith in communism and Mother Russia, all of them were eventually purged and assassinated or killed by the very movement that they so worshipped. And that's, I think, less spoken, but it's a terrible tragedy. I actually have a book someone lent me. Oh, what's the title? It's the trials. It was these mock trials in the 40s, and it's all these Jewish literary, intelligentsia. Many of them were part of this movement, and when you read that story, you can't help but feel bad for them, how they were utterly set up, but the tragedy was they didn't see where things were heading. And I think if they would have known that communism would eventually consume them too, I'm sure they would have been less vicious and a little more even keeled. So the celebration of today is that the previous Rebbe, after being imprisoned and sentenced to death, and actually he was meant to be ushered right into the firing squad. And what happens is the previous Rebbe decides that he's not going to cooperate at all with the arresting officers. And so they take him in and they bring him into this large building in Leningrad or St. Petersburg, which was where he was living at the time. And they tell him to go to a certain room. And they let him walk there. Because it was a whole game where they thought they had their independence. And he decided he's not listening. So he went the other way. And he ends up meeting another officer there. And the guy says, "Where are you going?" And he says, I'm from Lubavitch. I don't know where I'm going, but I've been sent to room X. And the guy's face turns white. He says, "Oh, don't go there." And they were going to shoot him right on the spot. And he ends up, by whatever happens, he ends up avoiding that immediate consequence. And now he has to go a little bit more through the system. He's sentenced to death by the firing squad. And large campaigns happened in the U.S., in the Boston area in particular. There was different people that had developed a relationship with the previous Rebbe who campaigned, and they ended up using a very strange connection, which I wouldn't even think of as a reasonable connection. But there was a family in Boston who was very close to Justice Brandeis. And they end up getting Justice Brandeis to use connections that he has in the State Department to send cables to the Soviets, insisting that the previous Rebbe was a very important leader of large demographics in the States. And then also in the Latvian parliament, there was a Jew called, and I promise you we're going to get to the Gemara in a moment. In the Latvian parliament, there was a Jew called Mordechai Dubin, who was also a Chabad Chassid, and he used his political connections as well to bring a lot of pressure to Russia, eventually, or the Soviets. Eventually, he's sentenced to 3 years of harsh labor. And then on the 12th of Tammuz, he's allowed out. He eventually ends up in Poland for 10 years, and then he ends up in the States. And all of the work that the Chabad has done in the US would not have happened had he been killed there on the spot. And also a lot of the work that Chabad did in Russia in the 20s and 30s, but then in the 30s and 40s and 50s, and then 60s, and then renewed later on, that all would not have existed if not for this day. And so in the Chabad calendar, it's a special day. It's also the previous Rebbe's birthday. And so that's why when we say Yud Beis Tammuz as today's date, there's a little extra excitement in the Chabad world. But now we're going to share the screen and get down to business. We are learning Mesechet Kol HaKelim, and our subject, the subject at hand, has been Muksa, the handling of the use of Kelim, of vessels. What's the big question? So until now, we were talking about their essential function. Was it manufactured to be used in a certain capacity? How are we going to use it? Is it needed? Those were all the questions that we had in the past missions. Now we're talking about another issue, which is a broken keli, a keli that breaks. Does a broken keli maintain its original non-muksa status or not? And so our Mishnah brought a machlokes, and I'm reviewing this now because it's going to be relevant for our Gemara. The Mishnah brought a machlokes. The Tana Kama says, as long as there is any function, it's not muksa, because in the onset of Shabbos, it was attached to a keli that was not muksa. It was permissible to use on Shabbos, or it was used on Shabbos. And then even once it broke, it now has another use. And that's the Tana Kama. Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah says, no, it has to be me'ein melachta. It has to resemble its original intended use. And as we know, that's consistent with Rabbi Yehuda's viewpoint in general, that is his general opinion on this matter. It's relevant to repeat now, because if you recall on Friday, we started talking about a story of an oven. The Tosefta teaches a halacha. The halacha is Shivrei Tanor Yashan, the shards of an old tanor. Pardon me for doing this. Does anyone remember how old an old oven is? Anyone recall what an old oven?
Once it was used. It
was used even one time. It was heated up. Now it is no longer a new oven. You know, it actually makes sense. You know, you buy something unused from the store. The moment you take it home and you use it once, it's already not new. And actually, people don't realize the returns departments in many stores, you think, oh yeah, I buy something, I return it. They put it back on the shelf. But I have a friend. Yeah, him and his wife both work in a large company that their whole job is to help Walmart and Target and all these very large corporations resell and recap some of the losses of the sales of returned items. So you think that when you return an item to Walmart, it goes straight back onto the shelf. Maybe it does, but it shouldn't. It goes to a separate company who has their own process of reselling used stuff. How much was it used?
Refurbishing,
secondhand.
big business, huge business.
Right. But what's the point? You used it one time. Maybe you didn't even use it, but it's already not new anymore. So that's not quite the idea here, but that's the idea. A tanor yashan means it's already been fired up, and therefore the material is extra hard, and it can be repurposed for solid use. So here again is the Tosefta. Tanur Rabban, Shivrei Tanur Yashan, Harehein Kechol HaKelim. A shard of a smashed, broken tanor has the halachic status of any keli, hanitolim b'chatzer, and it can therefore be used. Divrei Rabbi Meir. This is the teaching of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says no. Ein ni tolim. They cannot be used. Let's read Rashi. Tanor Yashan shekvar husak. It was already fired up. The charas of kashim, and now the pieces of the earthenware is very hard. And it's fit for melacha. So the halacha is, says Rabbi Meir, harehein kechol hakelim. The kamei, the Gemara is going to mefarish pluktayu v'tamayu. The Gemara is going to at length discuss what the exact essence of the debate about the oven is. But in a short point, Rabbi Meir says any use of these shards, they're not muksa. Rabbi Meir says no, it's muksa. I'm sorry, Rabbi Yehuda says Eini Tolim. Hey, Rabbi Yehuda, Mishum, Rabbi Elazar, Bar Yaakov. The Tosefta continues with quoting Rabbi Yossi.
He said the same Rabbi Hustanur that the rabbis broke.
No. Same name, Eliezer, but it's a different person, to my knowledge.
Okay.
What's unique here, it's actually a very good question. It's a very good point. It would be interesting if that same rabbi was found around ovens all the time.
Right.
But if I'm not mistaken, this Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is unique in the Talmud, that whenever we have a text that says, Hey, Rabbi Yossi Mishum Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, we give an incredible degree of weight to his assertion, his testimony. So if we see this throughout the Talmud, the Mishnaic literature, the Mishnah, Tosefta, Braita, it means that the words that follow are going to be taken very much under consideration for the halachic opinion. So again, he says, Shivrei Tanur Yashan, Shenitolim b'Shabbos, they are not muksa, they can be carried. So he is essentially asserting, seems like the opinion of Rabbi Meir, V'al Kisuyoy, and more so, or an additional teaching, the handles, the covers, She'enot Tzarich Beis Yad, they do not need a handle. And if you recall, Reb Beryl, right in the very beginning of our discussion about the covers, Reb Beryl right away honed in that there's going to be a question about handles. And so I told you then it's going to come up. And so here we are, it's come up. Rashi Val Kisoyo, Shel Tanor, She'enot Tzarich Beis Yad, the cover does not need a handle. The Bulav Beis Achiza Metaltale, it's carried even without a handle. And Rashi points out that there is indeed a machlokes. Not everybody agrees it doesn't need a handle, but Rabbi Yossi conveys from Elazar ben Yaakov that halachically it remains accessible even if it does not have a handle. This is the text that our Gemara is now going to have a little fun analyzing and discussing. Any comments or questions before we jump into the B'mai Kamifligi? What is the essence of the debate? So the Gemara continues and says as follows: B'mai Kamifligi. What's the underlying disagreement? Is there an underlying disagreement that's broader than just what to do with a broken oven? Because let's acknowledge that in the scheme of life, in the scheme of things, and Reb Beryl, this is a kind of question I think you would ask us to clarify. In the scheme of things, how frequently does somebody have a broken oven on their hands? Probably very infrequently. There are other things that happen commonly, but a broken oven, I don't even know if everybody has an oven. And so, let's understand the essence of the machlokes. Let's try to broaden or deepen the debate. Now, I should remind you, we looked at a picture on Friday, and let me see if I have the picture open yet. Where do we find it? Because it wasn't in here. Yeah, I don't know where that picture went. But anyways, we had, I didn't have a picture. I told you I would give you a picture. Hold on one second. I knew I was missing. I was forgetting something. Bear with me a moment. I'm going to take a picture of the Art Scrolls pictures and we'll post it on the computer. Bear with me. All right, stand by. I just got to stop the share for a moment. Don't go anywhere. All right, hang on. You're going to get it in your Talmud Chabura too. Open the images. Now we can once again share the screen. Here we go. All right. So I don't think we need to right now like utterly analyze the picture because these pictures are actually describing a specific subcategory. But the point that I want you to appreciate now is that the Gemara imagines that an oven is really a clay cylinder, usually placed on the ground. And in the bottom, you have a fire that that runs through the entire oven. Here we're imagining the next thing the Gemara is going to say, which is that you put the oven not on the ground, but you put it in a pit, and the fire's in the pit, and the fire runs through. So we'll see that in a moment. But for our purposes right now, we need to imagine that an oven is something like a cylinder. As I mentioned on Friday, there's something called a tandoor, which I think is connected to Indian culinary, whatever, and then the Bukharian, Uzbeki society
Rabbi,
has a similar.
in the Middle East, in the Arab, they used an oven called a taboon, Taboon. If you
And they make pita there, right?
yes, and that's what they use in our areas. If you Google that, you'll also see something similar.
And it brings to mind, I know we don't have any Chicago people here, but in Chicago, at least in my days, there was a kosher, like shawarma kind of place called Taboon Grill. Oh, here.
But in taboon oven, or
so probably Taboon Grill was named after that because of the Taboon oven. Bear with me, folks. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, Taboon Grill. Let's go.
All right. So today, I guess they're selling very fancy.
No, if you go further down, you'll see it.
Here we go. Oh, precisely. This is precisely what we're describing. So a taboon, or probably a tandoor, depending if you're in the Middle East or if you're more of in an Indian area or an Uzbeki, Bukharian. So you have essentially, you see here, the taboon. It's on a slight angle, but it's essentially the same idea. A clay constructed structure. Maybe you feed the fire over here. The food, there are variations of it, but this, I think, does actually a great job expressing what we're talking about here. The beautiful, yummy lafa. They don't call them lafas; they call them whatever they call these breads. If you go to India, it's one thing. If you go to Uzbekistan, it's another thing. And if you go to how do you call it? If you go to if you go to one of those encampments in Israel, what do you call it? You know what I'm talking about. You spend the night with the
Bedouins.
With the Bedouins, so it's another name, but it's a similar idea, and that's what we're talking about over here. So, b'mai kamifli. Here's the first answer. Here's Abaye's answer. It's actually the most easy for us to appreciate, but we'll see. We're not going to end there, so we'll have to exercise our brain a little further. Amar Abaye. Abaye says simple. Be'oisin me'ein melacha. The whole question is, do you have to do the original purpose, or ein oisin me'ein melachton kamifligi? Or even if it doesn't do its original work. So let's think about this. An oven that broke, you're kind of limited. A broken oven is not going to do oven work, at least not at our initial imagination. So a broken oven is earthenware that's good for maybe a bowl, maybe a scoop, maybe a shelf. I don't know. We could be creative. You're not going to make another oven because the oven needs to have that form to channel the heat and to, we think of these people as primitive. But if we do so at our own peril, because there's a lot of collective wisdom at the exact size, dimensions, shape, technique. These are not silly things. And the science of it works because it's created in a precise or relatively precise manner. So the oven breaks, it's not going to be an oven anymore, but you could use something else. So the argument is here, these oven pieces are not going to be used as an oven. So Rabbi Meir says, no problem. It could be used for any work, even if it's not ein melacha, even if it's not identical to the original work. And Rabbi Yehuda says, no, I'm consistent throughout. Remember me in the Mishnah? Rabbi Yehuda says it has to be only me'ein, the original melacha. So a bowl that breaks needs to be used for holding stuff, etc. Rabbi Meir is being consistent with his viewpoint. And Rabbi Meir is being entirely consistent with his viewpoint. It all makes a lot of sense. It all feels right. By the way, we have over here a wonderful insight to our Mishnah, because the Mishnah doesn't give a name to the first opinion in the Mishnah. It just says it's an anonymous opinion, which we describe as the Tanakama, but in truth, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir are famous debate partners. And here we're having absolute confirmation in the Tosefta that the author of our Mishnah, the first opinion, is Rabbi Meir. So this is answer A. I think it feels right. It feels nice. It jives with what we've already discussed. But of course, Rabbi Beryl The goal of the Gemara is not to make our life simple. The goal of the Gemara is to make us think and to allow us to really try to come up with the amitato shel davar. Let's truly try to dig deep and figure out where it's at. So, maskif law, Rava.
Rabbi?
Yes, doctor. Go ahead.
I have a bad connection.
Okay, I'm sorry.
The issue when I saw the when I saw the image of the oven of the tanur, and I thought about it before in terms of the top needing a handle. In our current dishes and pots, all pots have little handles on the side. Okay, and there was none in those times. Okay, so how did you pick up if you didn't have a top? How did you pick it up? You had to have you had to pick it up somehow, which justifies why a top wouldn't need a handle either. If you're going to use a cloth or something else and not touch a boiling hot tanur, the same thing would be true of the top.
Interesting. I mean, I was wondering. Yes. I was wondering the same thing. You're saying obviously they had a technique. If they had a technique, well, then they were able to figure it out. So they figured it out. Doesn't need a handle. In a time where there wasn't a technique and the handle has to be built in, so then you would need a handle, right?
No, even if you didn't need a top, forget about the top. How you boil?
Oh, you're saying
how are you going to lift that out?
I'll tell
I guess
you,
they just leave it and they just.
it depended on the size. If you go back to the pictures, I
Right.
saw one that had a top and handle. It was a much
Here.
smaller one.
Right.
This
There you
one,
go, right on the bottom. If you go back to where you were, and right on the
this.
bottom there was
Right,
one.
right there. Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
Right.
further down. Here we go on the bottom.
Not this
In
one on
bottom
the side.
center. You see, it's got a handle, and it's got a top.
Not the one I opened over here.
I'm not sure. I don't
No,
see that.
no, go further down. Further
Do you
down.
see the tabun oven?
Yeah,
Oh, but
but
this
you
one
don't
doesn't
see
have a top
a
on it.
handle or a top on this, or a lid.
That's so weird. Oh, okay. Hold on here.
No, go back to the original pictures.
But not this.
Yeah, but this is a metal. This looks like a new one. But go back to
modern,
the
it is
original
modern.
pictures. Scroll down one.
Here.
No, scroll down. Here we go, right in the middle. There you go. They're black and white. You see, it's a small one,
Right.
and it's got a top, and it's got a handle on the side. So, and the other one is probably covering the other one. You see what I'm talking about?
I don't, but
There's
The
also
black and white one. It's right.
there's a picture with some of them
This-
that
Yeah,
some
right
of
on
them-
top. The one on top.
yeah.
Yes.
it looks like a witch's hat.
That looks like the top. And on the
Right.
slide, you can see the handle on one side, and there's probably a handle on the other side that's covered up by the top. It's just a smaller tandoor.
Mm.
Or the smaller taboon.
In one of the
Interesting,
pictures, there seem to be some sticks, so maybe they flipped it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think also the workers. I mean, the folks that worked well on this, I think somehow developed a great ability to handle very hot and very challenging degrees of heat. I don't know how they
would
do
say-
that.
I would say that most of them were probably stationary, with the large ones.
Right.
They were outside
All right,
in the
just-
yard, and that's where the
Right.
women would cook them.
All right. Just to read for you, Rabbi Steinsaltz, in ancient times, people generally attached their ovens to the ground with mortar, lit a fire inside the oven and baked. An oven suspended in airspace of a pit, which is what we're going to discuss soon, would really be not considered a full-fledged oven. It's not complete. And so we'll see that in a moment. So again, but now that Baruch Hashem, and thank you everyone for your assistance here, now that we've somewhat imagined what the ovens look like, that's the discussion. If one of these pieces shattered and broke, so now you have all the shards. I mean, this looks like they use stones to make it, so it's probably even like a little more hefty than what we're describing. But here we're describing, again, I'm sorry, just to go one more time, because we actually have a picture here of someone fashioning the oven itself. Oh, here. This looks like a they're making a whole lot of them in their backyard or something. It's like you could buy yourself a tandoor or a tabun. And so if they break, before they were ever used, they're still in the guy's backyard, they're still in his shed, they were never really fired up. So then it's not really a serious, it's a new oven. It hasn't yet been fully cooked. It hasn't been solidified, or whatever the right phrase is. So Abaye made a lot of sense. It's the argument. Can you do its original use, another use? Shalom al Yisrael. Rava is not going to let us off so easy. Rava is going to force us to really think. And so here we go. Maskiv la Rava. Rava challenges this explanation in a very elementary way. And he says a question I think Rabbeinu asked. If the debate is about a broken oven, essentially, it's the universal keli debate. What's unique about the oven? I mean, I'll tell you what my thought is, that what's unique about the oven is that the oven is very hard to repurpose. Our oven is complicated to repurpose, but the Gemara doesn't think that. The Gemara says it sounds like the classic repurposing of a keli. Rabbi Yehuda says it's muksa, you can't use it. Rabbi even Meir says you can. And so that can't be the debate over here, because for that we already know there has to be something distinct and unique, a chiddush, about in the realm of ovens, which brings us to Rava's explanation, which is going to force us to do a little more background research on ovens. Rava explains, the high tanner kamifligi, we're debating about a very specific type of oven. It's the oven that's referenced in the following Mishnah. Ditnan. This is in Maseches Kelim. Maseches Kelim is discussing the ritual purity status of a whole bunch of different kinds of kelim. Some kelim are more easily susceptible to tuma. Some are more need to go through some other steps, either in their use or in their design. And then there are certain kelim that are never susceptible to tuma. And every keli has its own set of factors, or there are many different factors to weigh in. And so here, the Mishnah, Maseches Kelim, discusses ovens. And here's what it says. You have an oven, but instead of treating it in a typical way, nisano al pi habor or al pi hadus, you place the cylinder structure of the oven, instead of sealing it on the ground, which is the normal thing to do, you place it over a pit, over a cistern. A pit is more a hole in the ground. The dus is more of a constructed hole. V'nasan sham even, and a stone is placed. What do you do with the stone? Let's read Rashi. The high tanner ha'asoy ke'enzeh, an oven made in such a manner. Sheshana b'mishnah zu, shani medilach, the way that you're about to read. Shaloni taken kol tzarko mitchilato. It wasn't entirely properly constructed. V'nishbar, but then it broke. So the debate is about a half-baked oven. How do you get a half-baked oven? Either you fired it up or you didn't. Well, no, there's a case where you didn't properly install the oven, and so it's only half-baked, and there's a debate. And that's the debate of the Mishnah, which we're about to read. Rashi nisano al pi habor, tanurim shelahem, the old-fashioned ovens. And now Rashi is going to give us a description, and we'll see which of the pictures we see may or may not relate to this description. So bear with me as we read through this Rashi. Tanurim shelahem, the olden day ovens. This is Rashi speaking. So we're to us Rashi's old days, right? Rashi, once upon a time, many years ago, here's what an oven looked. Oisim kikideiros gidoilos. They fashioned like a large barrel.
Half an hour.
Ve'ein lahem shulayim, which doesn't have a cover or a floor. Umayshiva doesn't have a floor. Umayshiva la'aretz. And what you do is you would fix it on the earth, and you would seal it with clay, with cement or lime or whatever. And you'd make it thick, so that the heat would be contained. This act of sealing it, cementing it, is called tefela, where you attach it to the ground. And the oven now is sealed in all the way down to the ground. So what? Hold on just one second. There's one. Bear with me just a moment. That's weird. Hold on 1 second. All right, whatever. Okay. When we
They're talking about the way it sits in the hole. That if
No,
you
well,
go
no,
back
no,
to
no,
the
no.
pictures you put up,
No. Rashi is talking about the ideal scenario. There's no hole. You attach it to the ground, and the cylinder is the oven. It contains the heat really well. Our Mishnah is a half-baked oven. Why is it half-baked? Because it was put on top of a hole and it wasn't properly sealed, and so the fire could escape. And there was more area where the fire had to infuse. And so that's why this is a distinct scenario. And so Rashi first wants to explain what they usually look like and what's wrong with our scenario. So this is Rashi's really giving us a comprehensive crash course on the matter. So here, let's see. When we touch kach, because of how they are engineered, hevel shaloi kayam, the heat is very well contained, period. But if you place this very oven on top of a pit, or on a constructed hole in the ground, which is like a pit, a pit is dug, vados bebinyin, and dos is more of a structural indent in the ground. And they put a stone there to hold it in place. In a sense, your oven is hanging in midair, like this. Let's use this one, like this picture. You plop it over a hole, the fire is on the ground. You use a stone to hold it in place, but it's not sealed, it's not airtight. And as Rashi explains to us, the whole functionality of the oven is based on the premise that it's really well sealed. A little stone lodged in so that it doesn't fall into the hole is insufficient to fully insulate it. It's not going to have the same degree of heat. And now what do you get? A half-baked oven, a not fully fired up oven. And now Rabba is going to say that's what they're arguing about. It's not fully baked. A fully baked oven, we said. Well, let's see the Gemara. The debate is about the shavarim of a half-baked oven. You affix your cylinder oven instead of on the ground, and instead of cementing it the way you should, you place it over a pit, and you just put a stone there to lodge it in place. Rabbi Yehuda explains, if you fired it up in the pit, but it properly baked, it properly fired up the whole oven, it cooked the stuff it needed to cook, and the actual oven became fired up. Tameh, now it is a keli, and now it is susceptible to ritual impurity. Because what can become ritually impure? A keli that's finished. In Yiddish, we'd say afartik a keli. It's ready. It's done. It's a keli. The imlav, but if it didn't properly fire it up, well, then this is an unfinished. It's not really ready for prime time. The Chachamim disagree and say no. Maybe it's not fully fired up, but hayel the husak mikol makoim, it's been ultimately exposed to a degree of heat. To some extent, tamei, it is now a keli, and it is susceptible to ritual impurity. So if it touched something, it's ritually impure. So the very oven, and we'll look at Rashi in a moment, that when it comes to the laws of ritual purity and impurity, there's a debate if it's mekabel tuma or not. This is going to be somehow the very debate in the Tosefta between Rab Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda is very exacting and says, let's go back to the text now and just look at it for a moment. Shivrei Tanur Yashon, you can carry it. Rabbi Meir says it's a keli, you can use it. And Rabbi Huda says, no, it's the half-baked keli. It's not really strong. It's not really useful for something, and therefore it's muksa. Let's read Rashi. I know it's a little confusing, but we're just saying that Rabbi Huda says this is not good, and Rabbi Meir says it's good. Rabbi Huda says this is not how you fire up a keli. This is not how you fire something up. Let's read Rashi. Rabbi Huda Omer. Rabbi Huda explains as follows: Im difanoisav l'mayla. If the walls of the oven that extend upwards are close to the walls of the pit, that all you can place inside is a small stone, and it's essentially flush, it's essentially insulated. There's not enough space, and so now the oven's going to be properly fired up, and the pit can properly contain the heat. If the fire properly runs through the whole thing, anyways, Rabbi Yehuda says like this: if it's properly fired up, again, the fire goes underneath, but it's constructed in a way that the oven itself becomes fully engulfed in the heat. Tummy, then it's a keli, it's tummy. But if it's not properly, if the fire does not properly extend all the way upwards, if the fire only made a little heat on the inside but didn't really cook up the structure of the oven, tahor, Rabbi Yehuda would say it remains pure, meaning it's not susceptible to ritual impurity because it is not a keli. Now, I gave an explanation, but really there's a gezerah sakasov involved. There's a biblical influence here. The Gemara is going to explain in a moment that the oven to become ritually impure needs to qualify for nititza, demolition. What do you demolish? Something that is structurally affixed to the ground. An oven that's attached, that can experience nititza, and therefore it's susceptible to tumah. Confused? I hope not. So anyway, so this is the machlokes of Shabbos, and it's a machlokes in the laws of ritual impurity. I know you're going to ask a question. I thought we said we don't compare Shabbos to ritual impurity. So hold on a moment. But my kamifligi, what's really the essence of the debate about an oven that was fired up and it's in the ground and it's not properly fused? B'hai kro, it all boils down to a pasuk. Here's the pasuk. When the Torah talks about tahara, ritual impurity of stuff, it says like this: Tanor v'chirayim. If ritual impurity touches a keli, well, if it's an oven or a stove, a big oven or a small oven, and it becomes ritually impure, how do you purify it? Yutats. It needs to be yutats. A Dr. Stamler, Ivrit, nititza, yutats. What would that word be?
Breaking apart into small pieces.
Really breaking it up.
Rabbi.
It's not a. It's hold on. Is that a word that you would use in common Ivrit?
It'd be used, but not on a regular daily basis.
Right. So it has like a distinct translation, which really means to blow something to smithereens. You don't say, I'm going to break. Not every time you say, I want to break something up, you're going to say, I'm going to blow it to smithereens. It's like a very, I don't want to say bombastic, but an extreme, it's like a statement kind of word. Reb Beryl, go ahead.
Can't we go back to the argument, what are you bringing me in rules of Tahara when we're talking about something else?
Reb Beryl, I just preempted you. I said that question. I said we could ask that question, but let's hold off in the moment. Absolutely.
No, by the way, they use that word a lot when you talk about breaking up idols.
Nititza, right? It's like really smashing, like totally blowing up. It's like the kind of thing that a teen would enjoy this using. Like, you know, it's like it's a violent Yiddish, kind of word.
In Yiddish, schmettert.
Yeah, like really blowing, like really breaking up. Yeah.
Rabbi, I
yes.
have a problem understanding this. The way it's described, the way I see it, is that this thing is built into a hole in the ground,
Correct.
so that the earth is on all the sides. So how do you get in to bake something?
So,
And how do you clean
Alan,
it
let me
out?
so we're talking about a very different oven than our modern ovens. It's much more rudimentary, and it looks something
understand.
like the picture here. It's a cylinder. So when the fire goes out and it cools off, they probably would have the maintenance
I'll tell you
person.
also-
Actually, looking at these pictures, I'm not sure I understand how the fuel, wood or whatever gets into and how it burns, because there is no movement of air to go out. The top picture
No,
looks
there's no
much better than pictures below, where the fire is sealed.
No, because the oven is not
hole.
actually, the oven isn't cemented. The oven floor is open. So it's essentially a cylinder with no floor. This oven does not have a floor.
No, I'm talking about
The oxygen.
the lower pictures.
Oh, the lower picture is just giving different, the lower picture is giving explanations for how the fire might properly bake the actual oven, even though there's maybe a little space. So it says that if it's structured like this, well, then the heat will affect the exterior and the interior more comprehensively. This is not part of the essential discussion. The essential discussion is you have an open cylinder, you know, those big tubes, you cut it on both sides and you put it over a thing. So the oxygen is coming through the oven. Where is the food attached? It's attached either on the walls if it's bread, or maybe you would have like a spit running across the top. So this is really, you know, it's nothing. We use the same word oven, but it is an entirely different mechanism.
But you have to pull it out to put foil inside. This is very inconvenient.
What they did, for instance, with the dough, they would make it into a flat dough. If you go back to the picture itself, and then put it in the hand and then flatten it against the
It would
side,
lob it.
and against the side of the.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Here.
But how does the fuel, the pieces of wood get into that, into the hole? And
You can see the hole is on the bottom.
Right, how
And
it's
it's open.
ignited.
It's just a cylinder. It's not an enclosed. On the bottom, there's no.
You just drop them in and light them.
Yeah, I understand that. Still, it's extremely inconvenient design.
Right. You see this image over here?
Yeah, yeah.
So this is the idea.
How did
Here
they
it's a-
start it?
So they would fire it up first, I think.
And then put
then
the oven in.
They would fire it up on the bottom, and then they would lob all these pieces of bread, and then they would close it, and they had whatever, it'd stay for an hour or two.
Yeah,
They
they
would
have to
open it
have
and they would lob.
long hands to do that.
Either long hands or they had like wooden, they had like special tools that would extract it. It's a little bit gravity defying. I mean, if you're good at this, you understand how to make it so that it doesn't fall off. You see how they make it like probably, but this is just so that we could imagine how those ovens would work. And here, I don't think this is kosher, but here they have the same idea. They'd have like the meat on spits and they drop it in the fire, and it would probably get a lot of coal and ash on it. But that's just so we can imagine. Or here we get the full picture. You have everything going on in one. You have your bread, you have your food.
Cholent.
A real cholent. Yeah, and I think this is how human civilization cooked their food for a very long time. And our sages didn't have like a, they didn't have a different kind of oven. This is the oven it seems like they're using, and it seems like it's even biblical. So again, back to the pasuk. Tanar v'chirayim yutats. If it becomes ritually impure, it needs to be demolished. Tmeim heim, they are ritually impure by virtue of a nevela of a carcass contacting them. Utmeim yulachem, and they shall be treated ritually impure. Rashi, Tmeim heim, utmeim yulachem, the kefil b'haikra ribuyahu sha'avul pishenim mesukim. I'm sorry. So here is the machlekes. Rabbi Yehuda says, here is the rule. Do you know what kind of oven becomes ritually impure? Mechusar netitza, an oven that is whole and it's needs to be demoed, needs to be demolished, meaning it can be demolished. She'ein mechusar netitza, but an oven that the word netitza will never apply, tahor. And Rabbi Yehuda is imagining that netitza applies only to a oven that's affixed to the ground. A small floating oven could be broken, yishaber, shivira. There's other kinds of words, but netitza, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is discussing something much more structural. It's a structural demolition. Now, I know Dr. Stamler, when we clarified the word netitza before, it's not obvious that it's exclusively about a structure. It more is obliterating. It's more how extensively demolished an item is and what kind of item. But for the purposes of Rabbi Yehuda, he understands that was a demolition. Rabbanan have a different take on this whole verse. When it says it will be impure, mikol makom, they're creating a very loose criteria to become ritually impure. Even if it's not fully finished, even if it's not fully attached to the ground, mikol makom, no matter what, it's susceptible to ritual impurity. Rashi, the kefil beikra riboyu shapal pisha ena mesutin called sarkai. Even a half-baked keli, according to the Rabbanan, is susceptible to ritual impurity. And so, on the basis of reading the same verse, Rabbi Yehuda would have a very extreme viewpoint. It needs to be fully finished. It needs to be fully fired up. It needs to be properly attached to the ground or very snugly fit. Rabbanan say, even if it's not well constructed, even if it's not fully fired up, it is still susceptible to ritual impurity. Again, this is all a discussion about ritual impurity. So now the Gemara is going to do it. Go ahead.
I can't. I just don't understand something. When the fire is out, this thing is in the earth. All kinds of bugs and creatures come out of the ground, and then you're burning that while you're cooking something.
I don't know. That's what ancient civilizations dealt with. We also.
What is that?
You're asking a kosher question? A kosher
Both.
question?
Both.
Well, first of all, I think, I don't know. I don't know. That's a good question. What do you do if a bug? Well, first, I don't think bugs make it anywhere close to the surface because this is going to be a very, very hot situation.
No, but when it's cooled off, they come.
Well, then what's the problem? You want to know food gets in? I don't know. It's a very good technical question. We have to ask people that use this technology, this technique, if there's an issue with bugs. I mean, I imagine you're right. Look, we have a bunch of those chicken legs that you saw over here. Or I'm saying chicken legs. They may have been another kind of animal. And so there's a lot of schmutz and grease and flavor that drips to the bottom. So do bugs come? That's really a question. It's a factual question we need to ask tandoor or tabun owners. It's a good question. I just don't know the answer. And
it just stands to reason.
For the purposes of our Gemara, we are unperturbed by the possibility of bugs. I'll just say that. But it's a good question, and it's something to consider. So now the Gemara is going to push back in a common way. If you and I both read a verse and have a different conclusion, well, what are you going to do with the thing that was compelling to me, and what am I going to do with the thing that was compelling to you? So Rabbanan Nami, the rabbis, have a problem. Rabbi Meir, Haksiv Yutats, the word this uses Yutats, breaking in a demolition, in a total smashing kind of way. So the Gemara says, Ahu le'idach gisa. On the contrary, this is understood from our viewpoint. Here's what I would explain. If the oven is attached to the ground, it's not a keli at all. It's just part of the ground. And therefore we say yutats. Even if it's attached to the ground, it is still susceptible to tumah. So yutats here is not to tell us a limitation, only when it's susceptible to netitza, only when it's susceptible to demolition. But even when it's not a normal keli, most kelim are not attached to the ground. Rabbanan say, even if it's attached to the ground, it still becomes ritually impure. So the Rabbanan use this word to fortify their viewpoint. What is their viewpoint? To have a very expansive definition of a fully baked oven. It could be affixed, it could be loose, it could be fully baked, it could be half baked. The Rabbanan say it is always susceptible to ritual impurity. The Idach Nami, what's Rabbi Yehuda going to do with the verse that is compelling to the Chachamim. Haksiv Tameim Yulachem. It shall be ritually impure. No, that teaches us something very unique. Hahi Kid Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. This is used for a special teaching that was taught by Shmuel. The Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Machlokes behesek rishon. The whole debate: is it tamei? Is it not tamei? If it's not fully baked, that's only the first time you fire it up. But once you burn the oven twice, afilu tolab et savar gomel. Then even if it's not affixed, even if it's very loose, you burn it twice. Now you're treating it like an oven. Now it's already been heated up twice. It should be considered ritually impure. Rashi. The whole debate is by a hesek rishon. However, anyways, based on other Gemara, another teaching, the first firing up, that's what makes it a kelim. But hesek sheni, shemitchila nasek eshar tanur michuber laaretz, oy leeven av v'husek sham v'nasak kli, soif netla misham v'naslaf yavar. I misunderstood the Gemara. The way Rashi explains it, if it was one time used normally, then no matter how you use it, it's already an oven, even if it's very loosely affixed. So long as it had an original firing up, says Rashi, whatever happens later is considered a kelim. So long story short, today's Gemara has dominated a discussion about these ovens that are attached or not attached. And as it applies to Shabbos as well, there's a machlokes. What's the machlokes? Rabbi Yehuda says if it's attached to only if it's attached to the ground, it's considered a keli at all. Hold on, no. So what's the machlokes of the brisa? Let's just go back one more moment. Shivrei Tanur Yashan. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, according to our mayor, a half-baked oven is a keli. It's shvarim could be used. According to Rabbi Yehuda, because it's not properly baked, it's not a keli. It's shards are muksa because it never became a keli. That's what they're. According to this explanation, that's their machlokes. Ula is going to demolish this explanation too. Amar Ula. Oh, I'm sorry, not Ula. No, I'm sorry. Ula adds to this discussion. Rav Ashi is going to blow up this explanation. Amar Ula, the hesek rishon l'Rabbanan. The first time you fire something up, the Rabbanan say afilu toleh b'tzavar gamul. Even if it's nominally fired up, even if it's floating in the air, it's already considered ritually impure. So the Rabbanan are very, very flexible. They say so long as it was etvas, it was somewhat used with fire, it's considered a keli. It's considered mekabel tuma for the purposes of tuma and tara, and it's considered a keli for the purposes of Shabbos. Rebel, you asked the question. I want to answer this very briefly. You asked, since when do we compare Shabbos and tuma? So the answer is we're not comparing Shabbos and tuma. We're just borrowing the scenario and applying it. So you're right. We cannot instinctively learn from one to the other, but we can discuss the same scenario in a different context, in the context of Shabbos. So Rava says, we have a Tosefta that argues about a Tanur Yashan, an old oven, if it's muksa or not, if you could use the shvar or not. Rava says it's the same debate, the same argument about a half-baked oven. Is it considered an old oven or a new oven? Maskiv la Rav Ashi has a challenge, a very good challenge. He blows up Rava's explanation. If what you're describing is a question of, is an oven considered a keli or not? There's no need to talk about shavarim. There's no need to talk about broken pieces. Lipalgu betanar gufa. We have a question about the oven. Is the oven muksa? Is the oven considered a keli or not? Based on Rava's explanation, the oven is not a keli. The oven is still under formation. There's no question that its shards, its shattered pieces are not considered kelim. And therefore, Rav Ashi says it is impossible that the Tosefta that talks about broken oven, it's impossible that this is the subject of their discussion. El Amar Rav Ashi, and therefore Rav Ashi gives a third perspective on the Tosefta. L'olam kida amaran, What we're talking about is a regular oven that broke. And what's the halacha of the shards? Here the debate is that we used the oven to be a sort of heating board. I don't know where Rabbi Steinsaltz translates it. Well, he probably translates it literally based on the study of language. He crafts a ceramic board. What is a ceramic board? Let's read Rashi. The issue is it similar to its original use or not? We're talking about a regular broken oven. You asked the question, who's talking about ovens? Let's talk about every keli. Where there is a reason. Because you're using the broken pieces of the oven for an oven adjacent use. It's a kind of board that you light a fire underneath it. It's kind of like a modern stove, but it's not. It doesn't utilize the real. It doesn't utilize a proper oven technique. Let me see if there's a picture here. I don't think there is, but I'm hopeful. No. Imagine you take a strip of surface and you just light a fire underneath it, kind of like a stove. So you're using the piece of the oven that was originally a proper. It had a whole science to it of how it can. Yeah, a blech. Yeah, it's like a blech. Yeah, exactly. It's like a blech. They don't have an interior. So where are you placing the food? A usual oven, the food goes on the inside. Like here. But imagine it breaks, and now you take a little piece of this wall and you put the food on the outside. And so Rav Ashi says what the whole conversation is about a broken oven, but it's a little bit different than you imagine. Rabbi Meir lidvarav Rabbi Yehuda ka'amar. Rabbi Meir is telling Rabbi Yehuda, my opinion is you could use a keli that broke for any other use. Your opinion is it has to be ke'ein melach. What about a broken oven? So he says like this. Lididi, Rabbi Meir says, according to me, I say that it's good for any use. According to you, I say you would have to agree to me that the bake on the outside of the broken piece of the oven is close enough to a regular oven. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. Says no. An oven you cook on the interior. But here you're using the exterior. The oven is upright. And so basically, Rabbi Yehuda says, not just it has to be me'ein melacha. It has to be pretty familiar. It has to be pretty reminiscent of the original use. Rashi me'umad b'tanar v'oifen me'umad shapas tevuka b'doifen hatanar. The way bread goes is you attach it to the wall. Medes. And it's upright. The enim would tell us b'shchiva, it's not laying down. Shulav kirafim. So this concludes the discussion, the analysis of the Tosefta, an argument about an oven. Just to recap, and then we're going to close out for today. The recap is quite simply, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir are talking about a broken oven, a tanar yashan, a old oven. Option A, any broken oven. Rabbi Meir says you can use it for something else. Rabbi Yehuda says no. The Gemara says that doesn't make sense though, because then there's no chiddush about an oven. Enters Rava. Rava gives us another explanation. It has to do with a unique kind of oven, an oven that's half baked. Is it a keli? Is it not a keli? Rabbi Yehuda says it isn't. Rabbi Meir says it is. Where do they get this debate? It has to do with a verse in the laws of ritual impurity, yutats or tomeiya. Are we very rigid about describing it as a keli, says Rabbi Yehuda, or are we very flexible about making it a keli, says Rabbi Meir, says Chachamim? And so we'd apply that same question to Shabbos, a half-baked oven, is it a keli or not? But then Rav Ashi says that doesn't work, because then we're not talking about shivrei tanor, we're not talking about a broken oven, we're talking about the oven itself. which leads us to a third explanation, which is Rav Ashi's interpretation. We are talking about the general question of functional fixedness or not. Rabbi Meir says there's a very flexible, you can be very flexible about its use. Rabbi Yehuda says we are quite rigid, but within rigid, how rigid does Rabbi Yehuda go? Rabbi Meir proposes to Rabbi Yehuda that an oven that was used in a certain technique should still be considered not muksa if you could use it for a related way of conveying heat to food. As long as you cook with it, Rabbi Meir says Rabbi Yehuda would agree it's an oven. And Rabbi Yehuda says no. There's a very big difference between an oven and a blech. An oven you cook on the inside, the board like a blech you cook on the outside. The oven is upright, the blech is laying down. It's a whole different story. And that's the machlokes according to Rav Ashi. So 2 lines in a Tosefta, a whole hour in the shir with 3 different takes on the Gemara. My dear friends, I want to thank you for joining us and indulging us in this Gemara. That was a little bit like some of the Gemaras that we remember, quite an intellectual roller coaster. With Hashem's help, tomorrow we'll continue the Gemara at 9:30 at this link, and we'll discuss that final part, the story of the handles, and then we'll go to a new Mishnah in short order. If you don't believe me, here we go. 1 paragraph, and then the Mishnah, and that is tomorrow's Gemara. My dear friends, I want to thank you so much for joining us. I want to thank you so much for working with trying this new time at 9:30. With Hashem's help, it'll work, but I'm open to feedback. If it's threw you off course or it didn't work, please let me know. And but for this whole week, 9:30 is the time, and at the end of the week, we'll discuss and we'll make sure that it truly works for everybody, and or the majority. But the ideal would be to accommodate everybody. And so that is that. Prayerful wishes for good health, good news for everyone on this shir, households, family, and all of Klal Yisrael. And again, thank you all so much.
How many people
Yasher
joined
us? So we had in and out. There was like 2 or 3 people here, but it's mostly, I wasn't even looking at them. I was looking at the share, but
It's
if we'll keep this,
50% increase. That's good.
but if we'll keep it open and available, eventually, hopefully we'll get some converts. So, Yasher Koyach, everyone. Thank you.
Eshkach.
Stand by for Chumash.